about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis the 13th. Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head. My Rothschild niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day peppering America overseas. Pension for the workers, nigga please. Embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement. I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut. Foreclose if it close out the tenement. I twist words like a speech impediment. I hope you got good credit, bitch. If not, better get a new job with benefits. While I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with. New money buys brand new carrots. My old money bought your great grandparents. You got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya. I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are live. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J. Tonight, here at UCY TV. And if you're listening from somewhere else than UCY TV, give shouts. I don't know if we're still plugged into Real Liberty Media and whatnot. We used to, I know we were definitely plugged in back at the times of the Vince Easley was over here as my producer. But tonight we're talking about this is the part 2 of the tribute to Hugo Chavez. We'll be talking about that tonight. And there's a few other things to talk about. Definitely, there's been a few developments. One of the big ones, besides that, I would say is that there seems to be, right now in Syria, is that the 400, apparently there's a buildup now. The United States troops are going to Syria. According to the official reason, is because they're there to fight ISIS. However, we all know that's a lie, because the United States government has never been fighting ISIS all the way back since their original arrival in 2014 into Syria. And it's been since August 2014, or September 2014, it's been really a mission as a farce, a mission that's just there in order to destabilize the country and hand it over to the rebels and who are allied with ISIS, which is really just one conglomeration, the rebels and ISIS, that you could say is the opposition. When they talk about the Syrian opposition, that's who those are, in order to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. This is the regime change policy that they're pursuing in Syria, and I really doubt that they're differing from it right now with the current buildup of troops going there. 400 Marines have been sent over or are on their way to Syria, and soon, probably even more, I can imagine. I think Trump talked about at one point sending thousands of troops over to defeat ISIS, ground out operation. That's what he said, to defeat ISIS. However, we know that's a farce. And people say that Donald Trump is different. This isn't Obama. This isn't Bush. But it's been a lot of the same. And through his first few weeks of his presidency, I haven't seen any massive changes in the foreign policy and what's actually being done compared to what has been said, especially what was said on the campaign trail. What was said on the campaign trail, we heard a lot of stuff that sounded, a little bit promising, but we knew that this is just, empty promises. Just like what Obama in 2007 made talked a lot about the Indian-Iraq war and whatnot, or at least made a few mentions of it, from what I remember. It was 10 years ago now since Obama's run for the presidency. And, a lot of it parallels Obama and Trump, is that they're both seen as this outsider coming in to fix the mistakes of the predecessors, or the what is deemed as the establishment, and not realizing that all these people are the establishment. Obama, Trump, Bush. So it seems like a lot of just 2008 all over again. 2000 and now this is like the first year of Obama's presidency. That quickly the hope faded away, and a lot of people realized that we had been, the American people had been played, and that's what I think the American people are going to realize pretty quickly into the Trump presidency, that they've been played. And a lot of those people that were enthusiastic supporters just a few months ago will no longer be enthusiastic supporters, as they realize that his cabinet has a lot of establishment people in there. His vice president is about as establishment as it gets. And, of course, the same banking interests are behind the government as of yesterday. Is still there today. The ones that were there yesterday are still there. From the ones that were there in Obama, are still there for Trump. From yesterday to today, no real change. Yeah, what's this Donald Trump now has been president for about a month and a half. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, they definitely, there have been no moves made against them. And, it seems that Trump actually hasn't really, challenged any parts of the status quo. And, you see this health care bill that he rolled out, and it's practically like Obamacare 2.0. It's very similar, and he just changes the name from the Affordable Care Act to the American Health Care Act, and apparently it's so different. And this is the thing that's going to fix health care as it is in the United States. Rather than having like what Russia and other big first world countries have, which is just universal health care, taking the profit out of healthcare. We have here still the for-profit healthcare system, and it's actually the idea of the Obamacare, Trump care, whatever. It's really actually made it worse than before, because now you're forcing people to buy healthcare. It's forcing people to buy this product, and what's causing is that really it's aiding the big insurance companies to get even richer, as you're forcing people to buy the products, and without any, and the whole idea of the price drop hasn't really been happening. In fact, for a lot of people, it's been going up. We have apparently people paying double what they used to pay. So just one thing like that hasn't even been touched. So as I said, it's the banking interest of yesterday are still here. They're the same banking interest of today. And the whole idea that it could have changed, without, in the way that the whole election happened, that Trump would have been selected. If Trump was really anti-establishment, he would have never got to the point he is here today, which is now that he's the so-called president of the United States, even though, as I call it, the corporate spokesman of America, because ultimately he's just a spokesman that talks on behalf of the elites and the people that are really in charge of the country, and he's doesn't have any real power, and there's a lot of other people that have more power than Donald Trump. Donald Trump's whole energy behind his campaign, however, that's one thing you have to say, is that it was definitely a spectacle to watch, as he was able to really captivate a lot of people, just like Obama did, and it shows that Americans are hungry for change, but they're not getting it from the establishment. They're keep voting into this system that's going to pump out more establishment candidates. And it didn't matter if it was Bernie, it was, of course, Hillary, just another one of the establishment, and Donald Trump, or any of the other ones. There was all those other candidates. I mean, you just had Cruz, Rubio, and all these other ones that fell out earlier, like Santorum. You had Perry. Perry's now in the Trump government. He's now going to be the Department of Energy head, which is ironic because Perry, one time when he was being asked, I believe this is what happened in his run in 2012 about what 3 agencies of government he would get rid of. One of them was the Department of Energy, and I think that was the one he forgot. So Rick Perry being named the Department of Energy head is just really shows this whole comedy show of a election, the whole comedy show of a government that the Trump government has became. And again, is that people will probably just tuning in will probably think that I'm being too tough on Trump. You must be a Democrat. You must be one of those liberal snowflakes or whatever. And I was just as tough if you listen back on my shows. I was just as tough on Obama because I'm tough on the establishment and the New World Order that's behind these presidents. And I'm not from either party, the Democrats or Republicans. They're both parties of Wall Street and parties of bullshit that are illusions to keep people playing in this game of elections and keep voting for New World Order candidates. The Democrat and Republican parties have definitely been long sold out years and years ago. It might not have been the case a long time ago in the 1800s, perhaps before the Federal Reserve. And we had people like, Andrew Jackson, who was a Democrat, I believe, or way back in the 1820s, or, another well-known, the thing is that, people will say, oh, what about Abraham Lincoln? Wasn't he a good guy? But, Abraham Lincoln was also responsible for a lot of blood being shed in the Civil War. And definitely his general, Sherman, who was just absolutely, he was nutty for sure, what he did to the towns across the South. Sherman was pretty much just brought total war to the South, and that's part of the reason why the North was victorious, was because of that. And then, the whole thing about that the war was fought over slavery, is a myth, because slavery wasn't even brought up till 2 years into the Civil War. It was more of a thing about taxes being lost and territory being lost, and that's why the real reason why Lincoln initiated the war was not about freeing slaves. And it's just one of those things. It was almost like I guess you could almost compare it to like the human rights abuses that they are supposedly happening, even though there was actual human rights abuses happening in the South. It's actually kind of a bad comparison, because a lot in these other cases that these are not even happening. For example, like what they said is going on in Syria, and they're trying to justify a war over there in Syria. They don't give a shit about it, even if it was happening, but it's not happening. But in the South, they did not give a shit about the slaves down in the South. Another thing is that the North was helping the slave industry for many years. Just not long before the war, they had the Fugitive Slave Act that would, if you could identify a black person free, they would give you $5. But if you identified them as a slave, they would give you $10, which was a lot more money back in those days. So of course, it would be a lot better, for someone financially if they could find a slave and identify it as. But the problem was that a lot of times, well, besides the whole slavery and the law problem, is that a lot of people that were free were labeled as slaves because they had that financial reward being double. So that happened, and that was something that went on in the North. So that whole idea about that the North was so anti-slavery and the South was the only ones that were pro-slavery was wrong. There's also the potential. I think that the bankers. There's a lot of talk that the bankers interfered with the war, and they pretty much, manipulated both sides so they could pretty much crumble the United States from within. And some people say that, I think that the debt from the Civil War eventually led to the United States being in the position for the Federal Reserve Act, and there's also they talk about the 1871 Constitution that happened afterwards. Really, the most important thing when it comes to knowing about the Civil War is knowing that the bankers had a role in it, and that Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves is pretty much just a story that they tell you in school, and it makes America sound like a better place because it's like, oh, we had a problem, but we had this heroic president that saved us from that problem. And the 1800s, and I talk about it sometimes almost kind of romantically, because it's the time before the Federal Reserve, and that was one amazing thing about the United States before, was that we didn't have the Federal Reserve. The bankers didn't own this country 100% back in the 1800s. But there was also problems. Of course, there was slavery. There was the conditions that set up for these bankers to even get to the position where they could do a wholesale buyout of our country. If it wasn't for having a system that allowed people to accumulate so much money with absolutely nothing in their way, you talk about people getting billions of dollars in order to be able to buy this country. It's pretty much what happened to the industrialists, and everybody got together and they bought this country. People like J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and they got their money from stuff like oil, steel. You had the Vanderbilt still has quite a big prominence today. If you look at one fact, is that one of the most known news reporters in the United States is a descendant of Vanderbilt, and that's going to be Anderson Cooper. Which, when you think about maybe one of the most known faces in the whole corrupt mainstream media, it's him. And also he has ties to the CIA. Just to know a little background on Anderson Cooper. But the 1800s pretty much set the conditions for what would happen in the 20th century, which would be the Federal Reserve coming about. And also, these people were insanely rich. The Rockefellers. If you look into their today's wealth and how much they'd be worth today, it's like John D. Rockefeller was worth alone like over $400 billion. You had Vanderbilt was way up there in the tens of billions. You had J.P. Morgan. I don't know. He probably was in the tens of billions. All these people were way up there in the wealth, and that's why they had. You had people having more money than multiple countries combined. But there was also in the 1800s, we also had some. I think we did have some better moments, like when the second attempt to try to put a Federal Reserve inside the United States. It wasn't called the Federal Reserve, but it was a bank like the Federal Reserve. Andrew Jackson stopped it. So that was one of our high points in the. One of our high points in the 1800s for the United States. And I know I'm way off track of what the original topic of the show is, but I kind of just want to get some stuff off the mind, start talking about, really, I guess all this stuff really ties into today's situation, when it comes to where America is today. These 1800s billionaires and industrialists end up pretty much buying the country in the 1900s, and that same Federal Reserve still was in control of the United States today. And the messed up part is, we're in like tax season right now. It's March, so next month everyone has to have their taxes filed already. This is my first year where it affected me, because if people forgot my age, I'm only 19, and last year was really my first year where I actually worked, to where I need to file taxes or whatever, according to, they say that you have to file taxes, which if you actually look, there's no real law that says you have to file taxes. At least that's what some people say. That they say there's no law that you have to file taxes. The whole thing about having to file taxes is real sketchy. But the Federal Reserve, how this works, is that you pay, or the Federal Reserve prints out the money, they give it to the government. The government, is given a tab for their printing of the currency, of the Federal Reserve's printing of the currency, but they don't pay the tab. No. It's not like the Congress or whatever, or the president. They don't pitch in their own money, and they don't they don't find money from, like, for example, I don't really, when you think about it, the government's money is everybody's money. It's money that's thrown into the big government machine. So it ends up, they use the IRS to charge the American people. So we're paying for the printing of our own money. And the thing is that they levy such an amount to the government that it's too high to ever be paid off. And that's the point, is that they keep us in perpetual debt. And perpetual debt equals ownership. They own this country, the people that own the Federal Reserve. And also the people that own the Federal Reserve, ultimately, the people at the head of the Federal Reserve, ultimately own most of the world's central banks. There's one country in South America they don't own their central bank. Well, that's actually two, I think. Two I can think of. I think Bolivia said they're moving towards kicking them out or whatever, or kicking out the world, like the international banks. But Venezuela, they do not have these banks. Well, and these banks, I'm saying the Rothschild banks. They don't have a Rothschild bank. There's one, the one thing that they do not own their central bank in Venezuela, and that's in large part because of Hugo Chavez. As Venezuela could have just been in, just like a lot of the South American neo-colonial states, in the past, that was 100% working with the United States and practically indebted to the, not practically indebted to the Rothschilds and the people, the users who push their usury on the people of the world. But because of Hugo Chavez, they do not have a Rothschild bank. And, I see all these phony economic, doomsday sayers that say that Venezuela is at the brink of economic collapse. And here's what I have to say, is when is it actually going to fucking happen? Because they've been saying that they've been so close to economic collapse for like 3 years now. And, they seem to be holding on pretty well. These people were talking about, it's like, oh yeah, Venezuela's economy is going to collapse next fall or something like that. Or, they didn't even say when. And the thing is, because I think it's because they knew that it wasn't going to happen. They're going to have a little bit of rough patch with sanctions and many other things, but they're not going to have. I don't think their economy is not going to collapse. And also, they'd like to say that it was because of the mismanagement by Hugo Chavez or Nicolas Maduro. But if you look at it, is that Hugo Chavez actually brought their slumping economy in the 90s and brought it back. He did kind of a similar thing like what Putin did in Russia. He did for Venezuela. And, one thing they do like to do, as the, and when I say they, the mainstream media, the people that push these lies to the American people, one thing they like to do is that they try to make nationalization seem like a stupid idea. Is that that's the big thing that he did that pissed them off, or one of them. Really, the big thing was of course, kicking out the Rothschilds. But another thing that he did to piss them off was nationalizing the nationalizing the economy of Venezuela. And one of them was ExxonMobil, which ExxonMobil, he offered, and what he did is he offered a compensation to I believe the then CEO Rex Tillerson, who's now our Secretary of State. I offered them $1 billion in order to, give up their ownership of what they own in Venezuela. Rex Tillerson, of course, got pissed off, and he wanted like $10 billion, and he brought it to like the International Arbitration Court, where he actually lost, and he only got $1.6 billion for what he owned in Venezuela. It pissed him off, and now that's why you see Tillerson already by January. He hasn't even been confirmed as the Secretary of State, is talking about regime change in Venezuela. And he's saying that countries like Brazil and Colombia should push for the transition towards democracy. And, one thing is that when they say democracy, just remember that Venezuela actually has democracy. They already have a democracy. What they want to push is to turn into an oligarchy like the United States. And remember, the United States is not a democracy. People see all this, this train wreck of election that happened, and people still have the balls to say that that America's democratic, or that we should be pushing our democratic values on our countries. So we can have two candidates that are practically the same, they are the same. Total shit shows either way. And that's our model democracy. And then ultimately in the end, your votes don't really matter. They don't matter when it comes to the presidential election. That's what they're going to push onto other countries. It's like the same people that say that the Russians hacked the election is the same people that think that we should be pushing our democratic values on our countries, because it's to believe that our elections are actually legitimate. But it's a good thing people are finally waking up that our elections are illegitimate. Something that people in the activist community, we've been saying for a while. But I guess it took the 2016 election to wake a lot of Americans up about how bad the elections were. And then they had this little people's favorite or whatnot, Bernie Sanders. They see what they perceive him not unfairly not getting the nomination. And of course, I would say if it really came down to what the people wanted, Bernie Sanders would have probably easily won that nomination, and he would have been probably Sanders-Trump. When it came to who actually was liked, I know Hillary Clinton did not have that many supporters, but Sanders had quite a bit of supporters. But the thing was that Sanders was another establishment shill in the long run, so it didn't matter. But it goes to show you that it doesn't actually go by the popularity of the person. It all goes by who the people at the top want to pick. And this election, it really shows that we don't have any say in the presidential election, and people are realizing that. But they need to apply that when they're talking about foreign policy or whatnot. Syria and Venezuela, especially when we talk about Venezuela, it's definitely a functioning democracy. And in fact, they have they have two very different parties that compete. You have the Socialist Party, and then you have the pro-American Party that Enrique Capriles belongs to. And then you have, I don't know, well, the thing is that under the PSUV, it's like a unity of multiple different leftist parties inside of Venezuela. They all joined that in 2007, which before it was the MVR was the party that Hugo Chavez belonged to before that. Hugo Chavez, he ruled the country for 14 years, and that was one thing he was very good at, was bringing unity to the country. And he definitely, I would think that he can go down as the most loved president in Venezuelan history. While Maduro, this whole presidency has been controversial. I still think that, but I think that a lot of people realize that, what the media says about him is not true, and that thing is 60% of their media is still pro-American, pro-Western. So when you have their media like that, they're going to be pushing a lot of the same myths about Maduro or whatnot. But I think a lot of the people, even though that the polls say that only 20-something% of the people support Maduro, I think that it's more than that in reality. And the amount of people that actually support the opposition is pretty low. There's a lot of people, unfortunately, that have been tricked into supporting the opposition because they're being told, and it's a similar situation, I think, in a lot of those South American countries or whatnot, is that after a few years, of 10, 15 years, and they have their lives significantly improved from where they started at. However, stuff's not really going much further, on the tail end of those years. and they're told that their lives could be made even better or whatever, or whatnot, that they can go from being middle class to being rich. And these right-wing parties start putting out promises that are completely empty. Kind of like what I think, I feel like that's what happens across South America, and then they vote, and then ultimately turns into their economy already quickly starts slumping, and their government starts putting down very strict crackdown laws very quickly, like what happened in Marcio Macri's case in Argentina. Was saying just we're only been he's only been there about a year and 4 months, and it's already significantly gotten worse since when he started. You have Brazil already with Michael Temer. Things have definitely not gotten better. They've gotten worse since Michael Temer's arrival in September 1st. So he's only been there a few months, and things are already starting to sour in Brazil. You have, as well as there's actually the other ones are smaller countries, like for example Paraguay, Peru. I don't know too much about their exact situation. And then there's Colombia. It's always been a neo-colonial territory, and of course there's big problems in Colombia right now. And now there is this candidate that a lot of Colombians believe could be potentially kind of like what maybe like a Chavez or Kirchner did to Argentina. Robledo is the candidate, and people seem to really like him in the country. The thing is that whether he'll be allowed to win the election and whether it will be rigged against him. But he's running for 2018. The election's happening in a little over a year, and then with the election, you win a 4-year term, kind of like the United States, 4 years. Just they do it a different year. Santos has been there since 2010, and people are pretty fed up with him. Santos kind of just arised out of the Uribe section of politics, but he's kind of like the kinder face to neo-imperialism than Uribe was. Uribe, was pretty much, it's almost openly known now that the dude worked with the paramilitaries or whatnot, and that Uribe also took a very hawkish stance towards Venezuela. Uribe was a totally corrupt, awful president, and it's kind of like, but the thing is that Santos is the same thing. It's kind of like the Bush-Obama thing, is that Uribe was like Bush and Santos is like Obama. Hopefully they don't get tricked into another person that belongs to the establishment, and there's like a Trump in the card somewhere, or any other establishment character for that matter. I hope they don't get tricked into another one that belongs to them. And Colombia has been for a long time, stricken by the imperialist plan. The empire has, had their arms around Colombia for the last how many years, ever. There's never been, I don't think, a president in Colombian history that challenged the United States government nor challenged the people, the money makers, that doesn't sound like the best term for it when it comes to people, the bankers, the Rothschilds, or whatnot. But the people that ultimately are at the top, Colombia's government has never seemed to have challenged them. That's the problem is that with Colombia's politicians have always been spineless individuals. And was a rare exception, when it comes to maybe like Senator Jorge Robledo, who was running in 2018, and maybe a few others throughout the history. I don't really know too much about. If you go back, to like the 60s or 70s, I don't know too much. All I know is that back then they used to like have a system where they alternated between the liberal and conservative party every 4 years, I believe. Yeah, they would change after, and it was in the wake of military dictator Gustavo Rojas Pinilla, who ruled in the 1950s during this is the La Valencia violence. There was pretty much the predecessor to the Civil War in Colombia was happening in the 1950s, and into the 1960s the Civil War broke out, and the FARC started fighting Colombian government, and the Civil War hasn't really ended. It hasn't ended because even though the peace deal's been reached between FARC and Colombia's government, there's still the violence going on between. There's other rebel groups that are smaller, but still fight the Colombian government. So it's the longest running conflict on the planet. Now spanning over 50 years that the Civil War has been going on, and it's just one more aspect to the mess that Colombia is really compared to. People talk about Venezuela, their economic crisis. Recently, food prices in Colombia have skyrocketed 8 times. They've had bad inflation. They've had, for example, what their pesos to a dollar is just like half of what it was in 5 years. You've had very quickly. I think it was like in just a matter of a few months, their money inflated about 20% towards the end of 2015. Very mass. That's when we talk about that's almost starting to get to the point of hyperinflation. You have further privatization inside the country, and not even to ultimately, not even to. Bond doesn't make any difference, or not much of a difference, but between corporations inside the country, it's not even the corporations inside the country, it's to foreign corporations, all the way, like the Canadian company is ultimately getting one massive thing. Was like the Isagen scandal, which was a massive privatization project that's happened in Colombia. So compare that to Venezuela. And all these stores, apparently people rummaging through trash or whatnot. You have to take that all with a grain of salt. There's people who've been saying that they're like eating. I don't know. They said there's like people eating wild animals or something like that. Like some of the propaganda starts to go over the top about Venezuela. It's kind of similar to the anti-North Korean propaganda. Where it just starts to get these bizarre stories that. In the anti-North Korean propaganda, they've had examples where they get debunked. For example, like when they said that somebody was executed by 120 dogs or something like that, or that they had a story of that apparently about everybody there, or there's a lot of people are hooked on meth in North Korea. It was on Fox News. I don't know if that was actually debunked, but it's most likely untrue. And of course, the defector stories. Then later, there's been a case where the defector told the story, and then later he said that it was lies. There hasn't been too many defectors throughout the history, but of course, their information can be unreliable. And in Venezuela, I imagine that, of course, that there's going to be a lot of lies in the mainstream media about it, and when it comes, and also a variety of lies. But in reality, you can't trust the same people that said that there was WMDs in Iraq that tell you that that we need to save Venezuela from their government. That's what I feel like. That's the next step, is that they'll say that there needs to be a United States invasion or something like that, to take out the government of Maduro or whatnot. And now they are, now they're in the situation where they cannot force a recall inside the country. The opposition can't force a recall with against Maduro, where it would lead to a special election. They can still force a recall, but they cannot force a recall that would result in a special election. It would only result in the vice president, a loyal Chavista, rising to the ranks of president, and then he would stay there until the next election, which is next year. So at this point, and also there's the guy that is the vice president. It's been speculated that the dude's there as kind of like a deterrent in order to stop any thoughts of a potential recall. Tariq, can't think of the last name. It's like El Asami, who's an Arab descendant in Venezuela. Which, I guess it can be noted that the Venezuelan opposition seems to be pro-Israel, and they would not want to see an Arab become the president of the country. And I think would further the solidarity between Palestine and South America. It's similar to like what was during the times of Hugo Chavez, is that there was this extreme feelings of solidarity between Palestine and Venezuela. And over in Palestine, apparently Hugo Chavez is a pretty liked individual, despite the fact that he was the president of a country all the way over here in the Western Hemisphere, and Palestine's there. Apparently Palestine is pretty liked, which I found pretty cool. Hopefully the Maduro or whoever is the next Venezuelan president will work more on that. May Diosdado Cabellos. I know that if Capriles comes into the presidency, that of course Venezuela is going to take a pro-Israel stance, similar to what Michael Temer or Marcio Macri has done. And that's the thing about the right wing inside of Venezuela, is that they're pro-Israel. And what's another thing that's weird is you look at the internet, and the internet's a pretty weird place, but you see these people on the alt-right that and people that are a lot of times they'll start talking about how we should throw commies out of helicopters and whatnot, which is a reference to the punishment that Pinochet used to. Allende was the guy that was removed from power by this guy, by Pinochet. Pinochet used to take dissidents or whatnot into helicopters and throw them out, and that would be a form of punishment. And apparently, inside the alt-right, Pinochet seems to be a liked individual. Pinochet in the South American right, that's elite Zionists. That's the things that they claim to be anti-establishment, the alt-right, but they support somebody that was supported by the establishment, which is Pinochet. Pinochet was supported by Henry Kissinger. The alt-right, of course, seems to be just a whole bunch of contradictions together. It's a weird thing. And then you have the media using it as like a bait term in order to like people that oppose the mainstream view that they push are automatically part of the alt-right. They might label me part of the alt-right or whatever. And ultimately, the alt-right also has some people that are, not everyone in the alt-right is a white nationalist fascist. There's also people that are right that are anarcho-capitalists. I think that I think people that they've been duped and they're just going into this group that's really not what they're about. Is that the ANCAPs, and this is one thing I've noticed is that some people on the left like to do is they like to group ANCAPs as fascists, which is a false thing to do, because ANCAPs don't want to make a giant government and then round people up in camps, potentially by ethnicity, or this is not something that the ANCAPs want to do. The ANCAPs, what they talk about is a peaceful society where there's a free market and everybody does peaceful exchanges with each other, and apparently it will make the most just and equal society imaginable in the anarcho-capitalist society. But the problem is that I see is that it's just not reason. It's just not something that corresponds with reality. It wouldn't happen like that. And I feel like we had back in the 1800s, a pretty open capitalist economy, and it resulted in a few people getting very rich and then ultimately taking over the economy and turning it into a corporatist economy, and also, making the Federal Reserve and turn this country into a fascist country. The problem is that there's that can happen, and I think that it's always going to happen in that system. And then there's also that's just a problem with people on the internet and people in political conversations altogether. It seems like people like to group people together, and then group people like me are going to group me with the Stalinist of the internet or whatnot, which I'm not a Stalinist. I'm not a Maoist. And I acknowledge, and if people listen to my show, I acknowledge the crimes that were committed by Stalin and Mao. And that's why, I hope that, that's the problem, is that some people in the ANCAP community group us with those people, Stalinists and Maoists. And that's something that needs to go away when it comes to political discussions. And ultimately, I feel like that the whole Facebook political discussions, I don't know, it's not the best way of doing things in some way, or how it's been done. How Facebook political discussions is not the best way of doing things. Facebook can be a very useful tool in order to getting your information out to the masses. But one problem was, and now this is a little bit different topic, but in the activist community is the division, that we are fighting within each other all the time. It's kind of hard to spread our message out to the masses. And there's a few things that we generally agree on. This government's heavily corrupt, that the Federal Reserve owns this government. Israel has a special relationship with the United States government, and that in the Israeli government and the United States government have formed a dynamic duo of destruction that's destroying the Middle East, and is also working towards regime change in other countries. But of course, the things that we'll argue on stuff like Hugo Chavez, who a person that I'll proudly defend. And that's why I'm doing a part 2 of a tribute show about him. Because I see, at the same time, while the mainstream media will slander him or whatnot, I know the truth about him. And I know that he fought for his people. And this guy also, he had a long career. I think from all the way from the 92 coup, when he tried to take out the unjust government of Carlos Andrés Perez, all the way to 2013, to the end of his life, he fought for the people of Venezuela. And I hope that one day Colombia can see a president like him. And eventually that we get that type of president in the United States. I think Colombia's a little bit more reasonable that can happen sooner. But I think that a man like Chavez, that never really loses his connection to the average person. That's one thing. Another thing that is important is for a leader to rise with the ranks rather to rise from the ranks or through the ranks. And that's an important concept, I believe, is that, and of course that's, I guess, the difference between a career politician and somebody that's actually a fighter for the people, is that career politician thinking about how he can get to the highest level, but a man that fights for the people is thinking about how he can, he can bring the people with him to a higher level of standard of living. And in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez definitely did that. He brought people from slums to decent-sized housing. If you look at, for example, the comparison of the social housing, I think between Colombia and Venezuela, I think the people in Colombia live in like social houses, like just absolutely tiny, like 48 square feet or so. So I saw like a chart, a little picture, and then it showed the other ones like double the size, and you see these actually look like houses that Chavez had these people living in. And that was part of, the way he did these programs. He did like what's called the Bolivarian missions, and they were like different programs to help with different aspects and different social issues. For example, you had the one that helped social housing, one that helped the education. A lot of Venezuelans couldn't read in 1998, but his program was able to make many Venezuelans literate, as well as many more Venezuelans were able to have a house under Chavez. And when you see the people that support Chavez, it's not like it's it's not the people that are in the opposition, at least how it was a few years ago, was that the people in opposition were from like the richer class, but the poor class seemed to be very much in support of Chavez. And I think that they're still out there. The people, that, were the most affected by Chavez's presidency are still out there, defending the legacy of Chavez. And, now Maduro has taken the torch and, is now continuing the work of Chavez. But this is still Chavez's legacy on the line, I guess you could say. Is that it's the whole Bolivarian Revolution. If now it's on its 19th year, since Chavez didn't become president until 1999, but he was elected in 1998. It's almost been 19 years since his election, and now they've hit a rough spot, but this is a major test to the country as a whole. But you could see that I think they're going to hang in there. I don't think they're going to collapse. I don't think there's going to be anything like what happened in the late 80s or whatnot, like what happened around the Carazaco, as we hit not too long ago the anniversary. Well, February 27th is when the day it started in 1989, and there's by some estimates up to 3,000 protesters were killed by the right-wing government of Carlos Andrés Perez, who was supported by the United States. He was there in the presidency twice, actually. He was there like in the early 70s, and then he was there again from the late 80s into the early 90s. And then he left the presidency in 1993 after, he's forced to leave after a corruption charge. And the corruption charge was helped brought about by one of Chavez's future vice presidents, which would be Jose Rangel, who was a longtime activist and brought a compelling enough case to the Supreme Court that I guess they pretty much had to bring charges against Carlos Andrés Perez, who's also then after that Cardona wasn't Cardona, Caldera. Rafael Caldera took over the presidency who had been there in the late 60s, and he came back to be the president in the mid 90s. And then Chavez won in 1998. But Chavez was in jail after the attempted coup against Carlos Andrés Perez, which was on February 4th, 1992. And it's still like a big day in Venezuela, the 4th of February, which was, this is a day, I guess you could say, that really Chavez came out into the public spotlight. We just passed the 25th anniversary a little over a month ago, and Chavez at the time was 37 when this happened, and he spent most of his late 40s or late 30s in prison, and then he came about he was freed in 1994. There's actually a picture online. You can see the ecstatic Chavez being released from prison, and then he reemerged into the public spotlight. And he was really in the public spotlight the whole time, but gained popularity into the late 90s, where he was elected in 1998. And then you could say also one thing that might have sparked more energy into the Bolivarian Revolution was the 2002 coup, which nearly toppled him and actually brought about Carmona to be as president for 2 days, which was an oil businessman who was ultimately chased out and like 1 million of Chavez's supporters came out to support Chavez during the coup. It was a 2-day event, April 11th through 13th of 2002. So that means we're actually coming up on the 15th anniversary of the coup attempt. Bush and the United States government, I believe they denied all, support of the event. It's alleged that Spain and the United States had support of the coup, and Chavez came back to the presidency. It re-energized his presidency. But then there would be another attempt on his presidency about 2 years later with the recall referendum that also failed, and most of the people voted for Chavez to remain in power of Venezuela. And then he was reelected in 2006 to his third term as president, and then he was reelected for a fourth term in 2012. And there was also, 2006 to 2012, there were some pretty notable things that happened in there. There was the official creation of Banco del Sur in 2007, and Banco del Sur has still yet to become a functioning bank. It's remained a legal entity pretty much since 2009, which is it's kind of disappointing how that ended up. And that's was really one of Chavez's great projects, was to unite South America against the IMF and World Bank by making a bank that would, serve the interest of the continent. And, similar to the idea of what Gaddafi had over in Africa, which he was going to make the African Union and the gold dinar for the entire continent. And Chavez was trying to do that in South America. Now, I think that the Banco del Sur is not dead, and I think it could still, be finished. And maybe that'll be up to the next Venezuelan president in order to push that along. Or, I think also Evo Morales could also have a big role in it. The thing is that now Rafael Correa is leaving, another, big face in the Bolivian Revolution. And I wonder if his successor, Lenin Moreno, will have as much of a role in, of being a well-known face of the movement. But there's still Evo Morales, and Evo Morales being, kind of, you could say, one of the originals. He's been there since 2006. He is the president of Bolivia, and one of the most notable things about Evo Morales is that he's considered by a lot as the first indigenous leader in Latin America. He's indigenous. Bolivia is 55% indigenous, and but they have never been ruled by an indigenous leader. And Evo Morales has done a pretty good job in helping his own people, and also he's talked about moving away from the banks. And I think that Evo Morales doing that major step in his own country could set up maybe potentially a continent-wide movement. And Evo Morales is only staying though to 2019, and then he'll be forced to leave due to term limits. Even though that there was a referendum, and if the referendum would have been yes, I believe that's how it worked, he would have been able to stay as long as he wanted. However, because, and some people say that there was a little bit of fraud or whatever that happened, or sketchy things that happened with the referendum, if it would have went in his favor, he could have, because it didn't go in his favor, now he has to leave after 2019. A lot of these South American countries have no rules on term limits. They can, as long as they keep getting reelected, they can stay in the presidency as long as they want. In Bolivia, they have 5-year terms, I believe is how it works, compared to, like the United States 4-year terms, or Venezuela, they have 6-year terms. And they've been, now the four, what would originally would have been the fourth term of Chavez is coming to an end, and now soon will be a new term. Maduro took over very early in Chavez's fourth term, and Maduro ended up pretty much serving the entire term. But Maduro is probably not going to rerun for the for the election. He's probably Diosdado Cabello's will probably run, or somebody else will run, because, of course, of the very controversial time that Maduro became the president. It might not be the best thing for the PSUV to run him in 2018. And by the way, if anybody wants to call in, we're just passing 10 o'clock. The number is 718-717-8296. 718-717-8296. Here at Voice of Rebellion Radio, here at UCY Radio, this is Chris J. Always here on a Sunday night. It's been a long time now that I've been here on Sunday nights. I think I moved to Sunday nights all the way back in 2014. So it's been about 3 years I've been on Sunday nights. And it was a little bit different time. I think it was 8 o'clock, or I think it was 8. Yeah, it was 8 o'clock I used to do. I used to start. And then when I came to UCY, I bumped it up to 9 o'clock. And I also used to do it, I used to have school next morning. So having it at 8 o'clock used to make it possible for the show to end at 10 or whatnot. And then I could, I would go to sleep like 11. And then I could go all the way up to 11 with the studio hour. And before that, I was on Wednesday nights. That's when I started all back in 2013. For the people that have been with me since the beginning, you might remember that. I started in late 2013, and I used to do Wednesday nights at 8:30, and I would go to like 8. I would go almost all the way right up to 11 usually. And now this is set time. It's kind of weird, knowing when your show's gonna end by the minute. In some ways, because for a while it was kind of just like I would call it or whatever, just be like 10:05 or whatnot, end the show. But it's great doing it this way, doing it, I got like the stream conscious going or whatnot. Going solo, you could do sometimes it's good. And I was actually talk a little bit about personal experience. I was actually pretty close to the Colombia-Venezuelan border back in 2015 when I went down to Colombia. I was not too far away. And you could see one of the problems of the border, as was the illegal oil that was in Colombia, as people had smuggled it across, and they try to downplay that in the mainstream media about the smuggling problem. But the truth is that there was contraband being smuggled out of Venezuela, and that's the reason why they shut down the border. And in Valledupar, Colombia, you could have seen that, because they didn't have a lot of fuel there in Valledupar. And actually, because of the border being closed, because there wasn't as much illegal oil coming in, they were having shortages because the amount of legal oil wasn't enough to be able to supply the demand of the city. And there was big lines, kind of looked like the 1970s with the energy crisis or whatever. You see those pictures of the big lines, people lining up. But these were like huge lines, 60 plus cars trying to get some gas. There was also in Colombia, it seemed like I think gasoline might have been more expensive, which is an ironic thing because Colombia is a major gas producer. They're like seventh. I don't know. Was it? Oh yeah, never mind. That's a different thing. It's the prediction that they could be like the seventh biggest economy by 2015 or 2050. But yeah, like I said, there was lines of 80 plus cars. Yeah, I think I counted one time. It was a lot. There was lines of 80 plus cars, and Valledupar was a pretty bizarre scene that month I was there. It was and I was there as, I guess you could say, sort of a tourist. I was there as a tourist, but it didn't feel like I was a tourist. Spend most of the time with my family. I wasn't really outside seeing the sights and doing what usually tourists and walk around the city, like what tourists usually do. I was at home, a lot of times just on Facebook posts about politics or whatnot. and doing the radio show still. Remember that I did take 2 weeks out of the 4 weeks, which is like the most I've ever been off the radio, for like a span of time. I try to make it every week, and I've been here every week for now. I have a good streak going, but yeah, I was off for 2 out of 4 weeks there. Took the first week I was in Colombia off. I had plans that fell through. That's pretty much what happened there. And then I remember the fourth week I actually did something as tourist wise. I was in Cartagena that weekend. Which if you heard of that place, it's because it's like a huge tourist spot. It's a city that's on the Caribbean. There's a lot of stuff to do. They got like an ancient part of the city. But Colombia is right now. I saw it there. I mean, there's the crunch of higher prices. It's they pay pretty high prices for their electric, their food's high price. They also have similar prices on a lot of beverages. They charge like Coca-Colas or whatever are about the same price. Even though why would you want to drink the GMO crap? I mean, I was pretty much addicted to that crap for a while, and that's one of the bad things about that stuff is that it's addictive, and the caffeine or whatever. If I didn't have it, you get the headaches or whatnot, and you're all grouchy. Sucks. But there's some stuff that was similar priced. There was also really cheap food that you could get, but they don't get paid a lot. In Colombia, they only get paid 120. The minimum wage is only $120 a month. People get paid more than that. A lot of people, but there's some people that only get that, and they like a lot of times stay with their person that they are working for because they're like maids and stuff like that. $120 a month is nothing. I mean, when you figure that out, that's only like if you work 5 days a week, which I wonder if these people are working 5 days a week or more. But at 5 days a week, 20 days a month, 120 divided by, that's only $6 a day. 120 divided by 26. So $6 a day, that's it. These people are making under $1 an hour if they're working a normal 8-hour work day. This is lower than, a lot of times we talk about the $1 an hour and how terrible that is. These people are making under $1 an hour. And this is a country that's supposed to be like up and coming, and this is the wages. And Colombia's wages are known to be absolutely terrible. A lot of people live with family and stuff like that, so it's a little bit different situation in the United States. But our wages, of course, also are pretty bad when you look at it compared to other countries of the world, and also when you look at how they're the same wages of like 40 years ago here in the United States. But you see the terrible inflation that's happened over that time, and you can blame the Federal Reserve for the bad inflation. People talk about raising the minimum wage here. Now we need to go up to $15 and whatnot, but it would just be a band-aid to the problem because eventually inflation would catch up with the minimum wage. That $15 would, in not a long time, would be worth the same as the $7.25 today, which I don't think that's going to go up to $15 anytime soon. And I actually don't think the minimum wage is going to go up at all during the next few years. But I do see a potential dollar crash happening in the next couple of years, as the economists predicted, and that's something that people should brace for. And I don't try to be like the doomsday sayer or whatnot on this program, but I try to warn people of very real possibilities and things that are very likely to happen. And that's one thing, along with martial law. It doesn't look too good for the United States right now. And you have this president, and I think that's part of the reason why Trump was picked by the elites, is that Trump has been able to market the use of military soldiers on our streets as something beneficial towards the people. Like, he said that if Chicago doesn't fix itself soon, that he'll send military troops out there. And if Trump can get people to support martial law willingly, that's scary. And I could see that also if we get into a war with Iran, he will be able to push that. And right now we have these higher tensions with Iran. Iran's been put on notice, and Iran was listed as one of the countries where there's a ban of people from on the what they call the Muslim ban, which I think is that's not a good term to use for it, but what it is a seems to be a ban targeting certain countries that they don't particularly like. Like I think Syria is one of the countries, Iran's one of the countries, and there's 6 countries on the list, but none of them are Saudi Arabia. If it was really supposed to curb terrorism, Saudi Arabia would be listed there, because if you look, like, for example, the most of ISIS supporters on Twitter are from Saudi Arabia. The most, probably the most amount of people that are ideologically inclined towards terrorism are inside of Saudi Arabia, because that is where the heart of Wahhabism is. If you understand what Wahhabism is, it's the twisted sect of Islam that terrorists follow, which is complete deviation of the Quran in order to have this version that supports killing infidels and doing all this in order to make this caliphate or whatever. ISIS follows this ideology. Al Qaeda follows this ideology. If the United States government was really against terrorism, they would have absolutely no relationship with Saudi Arabia and also Israel as well. If you look at Israel, and they are supporting Al Qaeda and ISIS inside of Syria. And you actually look at ISIS, I wonder, coincidentally, there's an alternate acronym for Mossad is Israeli Secret Intelligence Services, aka ISIS. And I guess this is the type of stuff that gets your program cut off in the middle of the show, but that's the truth, is that about the Israel supports terrorism. Terrorism destabilizes the Middle East and destabilizes the true enemies to Israel, which is Syria, Iran, and Syria. Has for a long time been anti-Zionist, but I see this like propaganda by Saudi Arabia where they're like tricking, I guess, Palestinians into supporting the rebels in Syria because they believe that the rebels in Syria are fighting the Zionist Assad. But ultimately, Saudi Arabia and Israel are close allies. So it's like these people must be blind to the fact that who these rebels really are, that they're backed by Saudi Arabia, Israel, and that these people are Wahhabis. But the Palestinians, there's some of them that are actually fighting on Assad's side. Unfortunately, I think that some of the Palestinian community has been tainted. Their thoughts they've been tainted by the Salafist ideology. When I say that, it's by what they or when I say that, well, Palestine. Of course, I'm 100% behind their struggle right now. And Palestinian cause, which is the Middle East, these countries in the Middle East, they're 100% in favor of the Palestinians getting their own state, and I think Syria and Iran would like to see a Middle East without Israel, but a Palestine there, because Palestine is the country that's supposed to be there. That's their land, and most of the world recognizes Palestine. I don't know how many countries actually believe Israel shouldn't exist. And I hear all this stuff all the time from Zionists or whatnot, or when I'm watching videos, when I see like stuff like, well, they don't acknowledge Israel's right to exist. Israel doesn't have a right to exist. Now, when I say that, and it sounds harsh, but you have to realize I say that in the way of that Israel, as a country, as a state and an entity, has no right to exist. They stole the land from the Palestinians. Their government is committing genocide. But their people obviously have a right to exist. Now, these people, a lot of them were descendants of their grandfathers or whatever that came there and stole the land. These people that came about from East Europe, and I think a lot of those people didn't willingly do that. but were tricked by the people that ultimately set up Israel. They came from East Europe after World War II or whatnot, but these people are definitely invaders that came about. How that would be dealt with is that I think that if it ever came down to that, is that Palestine would have to a secular Palestine. I believe they should be able to live in it. Now, of course, there's going to be people that are so brainwashed by the Zionist ideology that they would never accept that, and they can be problematic. That will be dealt with afterwards. The Israelis have actually talked about, about the deportation of all Palestinians, and that seems to be exactly like stuff that was talked about in Nazi Germany and was done in Nazi Germany. And they always like to compare their enemies to Nazi Germany. They love to say that people that are against Zionism must be Nazis. They would say that I'm a Nazi or whatever. But they're the ones that are. They have ultimately because it's not because of their religion, but it's because they're ethnically Jewish. Is why they're so proud to be. That's why they believe they're superior. They believe they're the chosen people, or even like gods on this planet. And if you look at the people that made Zionism, they weren't even practicing Jews. They were atheists that believed in superiority by ethnicity, and that's why they believed like they were entitled to that land. But when it comes, I feel bad for those Palestinians that have been tainted by that have ultimately that look to countries like Turkey and look to the Gulf states, whatever, for help. That's the problem. Is that a lot of these Gulf states they'll use the Palestinians as a tool every now and then in order to gain popularity, but then they ultimately do nothing to help the Palestinians. Countries like Turkey, people like presidents like Erdogan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, which I don't know if Bahrain's actually even said anything, but that's just an example. Go to the went back to Venezuela was I feel that a lot of the poor people of Venezuela have been by the media. Unfortunately, the media is still working as a tool in order to brainwash their people, and their people have been a lot of their people have been turned against their government there because of the media, and their media telling them that that's the reason why they're struggling right now, and telling them that their lives could be a lot better or whatnot if they have the right wing in power. And 60%, like I said, of the media there is controlled by the opposition. And I mean, this is the same media that now, as we're nearing 15 years later, was calling for the assassination of Hugo Chavez on live air. And it's surprising that some of these people, I think, are still operating. I mean, just imagine if that happened in the United States. Again, the media is a weapon of mass destruction. It's one of the most powerful weapons that can exist. By owning the media, you could do some things. It's more powerful than bombs in many ways, because without the media, you might never be able to get your own people to drop those bombs on whatever country. But with the media, you can get them to do so. You can enable people to do things that they would never do unless the media was there telling people that's the necessary option. So again, I think that's what's going on in Palestine. Is that some of the people have been tainted in the regards of what they believe by Al Jazeera or whatnot, and not realizing Salafist propaganda. Here in the United States, people fall for CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, and you see a lot of that. People fall for Fox News right now is that they believe that Trump is going to fix everything. And these people that were talking about not long ago how Fox News is corrupt, and when Fox News was supporting establishment Republicans, but when they support a so-called non-establishment Republican, and all of a sudden Fox News is okay again. And remember that Fox News still labels like Putin as like a gangster, or whatever. They're trying to make Putin seem as an enemy to the United States. Fox News still does that. Fox News is still the same shitty media source it was 2 years ago. Or as one of my Facebook friends calls it, faux news, as in fake news. You know, phony news. It's that's that Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, all bullshit. And CNN, there's a few things you could turn. What's the one that was Crappy News Network, and then MSNBC, more shit and bull crap. Yeah. Even though that the N would just be like N, you know, that could be, it can work, that abbreviation. BBC, British bullshit corporation. That's all the big ones, really. You know, there's the United States of Britain, and you know, there's other ones. Like there's like Sky News over there, there's Sun News. I don't really, with British media, it just seems to be like a little bit more sophisticated version of propaganda. That seems to be the only real difference between British and American propaganda. I guess that over there in Britain, I guess maybe they have to go a little bit harder to try to fool them by using a little bit bigger words, or this is their method. They use a little bit bigger words, and they're able to push whatever they want on the British people. And then there's other Western media channels that seems to be all the same crap. You go to France, they got FR24, and then in Mexico they have you got Telemex, that giant like TV corporation, and their news, which is I'm not sure what the exact name of their news is that they have. What's their biggest news in Colombia? It's Caracol. It's probably like the Colombian version of CNN. And they also have RCN, which is, I guess you could say, it's just another mainstream media channel. So a lot of bullshit media around the world when you think about it. And here in the United States, it's kind of hard to find good alternative media. Even throughout the alternative media, there's still, or in some alternative media channels, there's still people that are, I would say throughout the alternative media, still disinfo gets out. There's still, and then there's people that are total shills. There's people like Alex Jones that, as I see, is turned into practically like a pro-Trump media. It's almost became like a Fox News or something like that. Alex Jones is pretty much, in many ways, it became almost like a Fox News host, and sure that he talks about some stuff that they would never talk about, but he's still in support of Trump. And he's went from some guy that said that we would never get a anti-establishment candidate through the elections to all of a sudden enthusiastically supporting Trump. He, just in 2010, 2011, used to say about the New World Order runs all the elections or whatever. And then by 2016, Donald Trump president, Donald Trump. He even interviewed Trump, which I could see me interviewing him, maybe just out of, that's what a journalist does. But, enthusiastically supporting Trump. And you also had Cenk Uygur, who's, deemed kind of like the alternative media. The dude supported Hillary Clinton, the queen of corruption, in his shows. And Cenk Uygur also, or is it Cenk Uygur? And he's also I think he's also just pretty much, he's just kind of just turned into a guy from MSNBC. Dude's, he actually used to be on MSNBC, but he's definitely turned into, like just any other host on MSNBC, which, there used to be Jesse Ventura was used to be on MSNBC, Dylan Ratigan. They got rid of anybody that challenged the official narrative and brought about all these people like Rachel Maddow and Melissa Harris Perry. And part of their game that they push is to push the racial divisions countries. A lot of times they really obsess about certain incidents or whatnot, and talk about how much racism there is in this country. But there's a difference between acknowledging racism in this country and race baiting. They race bait. There's definitely racism in this country. There's definitely things that need to be worked on. But trying to paint out white people in general as racist is race baiting, and it's spreading hatred. It's actually just ultimately it's a form of racism. It's what a lot of these people on the so-called American left spread, and and I say the so-called American left because they're just fascists as well. Is that ultimately all of it is that they still support the corporatist economy, and they support this fascist system. They still support the same shell towards this of the United States, and while they act like they're so different, they're still the same as the people in the Republicans, or I say the Republican politicians, and these people that are you think would be like a lot of Americans would think of like the polar opposites. These people are actually the same. And MSNBC, Fox, CNN, I don't make a differentiation between Republicans and Democrats. To me, it's the American right is the same as the American left, because it's all, to me, just the American far right. And it might not be the far right as the same as Nazi Germany, whatever, and white nationalism, whatever. But it's like Mussolini's Italy is the best way to compare America of today. Which one striking example of that, of Mussolini's Italy, is the United Corporations, or the Union of Fascist Corporations. That's what he replaced the parliament with. And that's just like our Congresses of today. It said they don't call it a group of corporations, but they call it this is something that's supposed to represent the people, but ultimately they're all owned by corporations. Just about every single one of them. At the Senate level, I could say every single one of them. At the Congress level, I definitely have been intrigued by Tulsi Gabbard and her recent stand against Bashar al-Assad. But then again, I heard that she's, me and Scott Rickard, a recent stand with Bashar al-Assad, I should say. But I've been really, I've heard about I was talking about this with Scott Rickard, a few months, what was it, a little over a month ago, and then, he was saying that she's still pro-Israel. And it's like, what I say is that every single politician about at a high level in the United States has to take an allegiance to Israel. And they take them on the propaganda tour or whatnot. They have different ways of turning them into the pro-Israel club. But Tulsi Gabbard seems to have a little bit of guts, at least from what she says. But then again, as a congressperson, I'm just gonna have to. I can't give her the benefit of the doubt, and I have to say that she's one of the club until she proves different. Because the only one that in recent times I can really say proved himself differently was Ron Paul. And you can see by how the media talks about Ron Paul that he was not one of them. Ron Paul was an actual person that fought for the people, and I saw that he's no longer part of the Republican Party. Now he's in the Libertarian Party, and he stood alone on a lot of issues. But he alone in the Congress, but definitely a lot of people were behind his stances. But Ron Paul did a very important thing, and is that he kept a public voice for the true anti-establishment. And I was kind of disappointed in 2016 to not see him run. I was kind of hoping that he would jump in, and there was even a little bit of talk, I guess, about Ron Paul potentially jumping in at some point of the election. His son Rand Paul, but his son's not the same man as Ron Paul. Rand Paul might make a little stand different than the mainstream Republicans. Like right now, Rand Paul is, seems to be standing up to Trump's health care bill right now. But Rand Paul is as far as I'm concerned, another member of the establishment. He's definitely pro-Israel. Unlike Ron Paul, who his father, definitely anti-Israel. I mean, I think even like some of the pro-Zionist media will even like say that he's like anti-Semite and stuff like that. I mean, that's the one thing they like to push about it, Ron Paul. A falsehood is they like to say that he was a bigot of some kind. They've said for comments that he's made, and that's another thing is that if you put a lot of people, especially people from that generation, and you put everything that someone said when they were angered, or even if these were true, what these comments supposedly where you call like some Democratic congresswoman a short dyke or something like that, whatever. There's gonna be some stuff that's gonna misrepresent what they really think, and what is that. No, that doesn't necessarily mean that he hates lesbians or whatever, and especially just just remember it's just a word. Do I agree with calling people dykes? Of course not. But that's if he's actually said that, it doesn't mean that he's a bigot. If he had a history of, especially like these politicians that pushed, like the Clintons, that pushed an anti-crime bill that locked up thousands of blacks and black youth over the last 20 years, that's bigoted. Ron Paul is not a racist, and he actually back in the 1950s used to provide care for poor black folk that couldn't afford medical services. Remember, Ron Paul was a doctor, an eye doctor, I believe, and Ron Paul, to me, never. In fact, he actually talked about the how the establishment, via these crime laws and or via the drug war, has locked up many folks of color, many black folk wrongly. There was actually a video that said Ron Paul's racist moments or whatever, and just pretty much Ron Paul showing the record of Ron Paul standing up for issues of race and standing up for black folk in the United States. And Ron Paul, I don't know what he really thought of people. I think he would disagree with me, like the policies of people like Hugo Chavez or whatever. But I know one thing: he would never support intervention against Venezuela. And now you have Donald Trump. He seems to be talking about this like a possibility. That the general feel he hasn't really said too much. I don't think he's really said anything about an invasion, but that seems to be feel inside of his administration like it's possible. And if it does happen, and the United States is to invade Venezuela, believe me, that it's a potential that I'll be waiting for them down there, and defending South America from an imperialist invasion. Because I could never. I'm not. That's one thing. Is that would feel almost a little personal at that point. Not saying that my ego is so big that it because of me. No, I'm saying that it would feel so. Because it's so close to home. Is what I'm saying. And if that was to happen, an invasion of Venezuela, I think there'll be. I think there would be volunteers actually from the United States that would be going down there in order to fight against the United States military if it was to happen. There's only been one volunteer over there in Ukraine, but it has become. It's if there was an invasion by the United States, that would draw a more volunteers or whatever, but because there'd be more urgency. But there's actually been an American volunteer that's fighting against the fascist government of Poroshenko right now. He's an American, but it shows that America. I guess there's been examples. That doesn't show really, but there's been examples of Americans fighting against the United States government in order to fight for what they think is right. Like in the Spanish Civil War, is that ultimately American corporations and the establishment of the United States supported Franco, while a lot of American volunteers fought against Franco. Which Franco eventually he rose to power from 1939 to 1975. He ruled Spain, and he was a brutal leader. 36 years and of power, and it was a fascist regime. And he also supposedly was neutral during the war, but he wasn't neutral. The man was pro-Nazi. Spain took a pro-Nazi stance during the war, actually. Of course, the side was the Americans that would be, that was the thing about the war, is that, you sided with the Americans, you sided with the British, and the Allies. So a lot of them committed war crimes as well. It's best to be just like Tito or whatever, that they fought for their own liberation. And, if there was a hero out of that war, I would say Tito was a hero. But Soviets, of course, what happened there, and there was some things that were committed towards the end of World War II that were horrible, was the rape of German women or whatnot. There was definitely war crimes committed by some of the Russians, or the Soviets, I should say, not the Russians, because it's really a different entity, but the Soviets towards the end of the war. But another thing you could say is that, at least it appears that without the Soviets or without the Russians, Soviets, they would have never, Nazism would have spread, which there's some people that say it was a good thing, but to me, I see Wall Street, I see big bankers were all behind Nazism. I think that Nazism might have been a failed attempt at the New World Order, but they didn't get quite the enough support from the Third World that Nazism didn't spread. But they kind of just passed that role onto the United States, and now the United States is, I'd say it could be a failed attempt. I'm not saying that's how it went down. It could have been a failed attempt at the New World Order, but now the United States is big military that's trying to push the New World Order around the globe, but now they seem to be failing. So, I mean, you have like the Middle East, for example. Iraq ended up turning against the empire, and Iraq is now taking a side with Syria and Iran in their fight against ISIS. And also, Wesley Clark talked about 7 countries in 5 years. Back in 2007, and now it's 2017, and so far I think they haven't even touched Iran, and Syria's still a work in progress. So they definitely have went slower than expected. And by the way, we're starting to get into the closing parts of the show. So if anybody wants to call in, the number is 718-717-8296. 718-717-8296. And when I say they'll be waiting for the United States if they invaded. Well, don't take that serious. I just said that in the heat of the moment. I definitely, and honestly, I don't know what exactly I would do if the United States ever was to invade Venezuela. But it's like going over to like Ukraine or whatever. It's different. there's different things that theoretically I could do in order to help out a cause that I think that's important. But I feel like I have my own little niche in the information war and doing alternative media or whatnot. Honestly, I don't know how good of a soldier I'd be. I mean, it's told from a totally honest perspective of, it's like I grew up in Florida. I mean, I haven't been in snow too much. I haven't seen, I didn't really grow up in an outdoorsy life, so I don't know how it would be, long periods outdoors and, in war conditions. So I feel like that might be something that might be someone else's struggle. That part of the struggle. There's some people. I feel like that's the thing with the whole revolution in general, is that everyone has their own little different role. But I'll tell you one thing: is that when it comes to me and my family, I'm definitely willing to do whatever it takes to defend them. That's one thing. Is that you try to go after me, you try to go after my family, and I'll fucking turn into Rambo or some shit. I bet that's what would happen. And because I know that to me, that's one thing that could probably bring out my that could turn me from zero to I was trying to think of something that would be relatable. I was gonna say zero to the South Side St. Pete real quick or whatever, but I feel like it's a bad example. But I could go from the little kind of nerdy radio guy, and all of a sudden I'll turn into fucking commando. Since sometimes I swear I need a co-host or something just to anchor me down from just going off on these tangents or whatever during the show. But I think some of my listeners enjoy my, off the top of my head, whatever kind of comes to mind is whatever I say on the show. Realize one thing is I don't have any kind of like scripting to the show. I mean, sometimes I take notes or whatever before the show. I'll do my little research or whatnot, but like when it comes to show, like right now, I don't even have a notepad. In fact, it's dark in my room right now, so I can't even like read notes unless I have them on my phone. Light bulb's broken here, so I'm just and I didn't change it. Really didn't got around to it. Then I actually kind of like this the studio setting that I have right now. I think it's kind of just have the phone light or whatever, and I can use. I used to have the tablet or whatnot. Also, in some ways I find this like a bit more accessible. The phone, you can get the stuff quicker. I don't know, those tablets it's not really the most convenient thing. If you ever, when it comes to, I don't know, it seems like when you're used to a phone and you go to a tablet, it's kind of weird. But right now in Venezuela, they have they're still have been having the protest as of recently. They're still having, there still seems to be a lot of discontents of the country, and the opposite. But I wonder how much of it's manufactured. I wonder how much of it isn't just the CIA and paid provocateurs acting through supposed regular people inside of Venezuela. And the protests have now been going on for over 3 years, and they've been talking about how close apparently that they've been to the collapse. All these doomsday people that are doomsday sayers of the country, and ultimately they're still there. And that's all I could. That's really all that needs to be said, is that they're still there and they're still doing pretty good. I think they're, compared to where they could be. And they've been heavily sanctioned. They remember back in 2015, Obama put them on the higher security. They put them as a higher security risk, and now they're still under sanctions. I think that the last, the renewal of the sanctions is about to run out soon, so it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen with that. Or I felt like I think it was a year that they would renew the sanctions again a year from the time of the last sanctions. So it should be right around now that they should be renewing the sanctions. They're going to do that. As well, there's the there's the been the attempted coup attempts that have happened, 2002, and there was one in 2015 that fell apart at the early stages. And I wonder when the next major coup attempt will happen. Probably, I could see that. I could see potentially it happening this year, maybe by a parliamentary coup or whatnot. But even though, again, like I said, if the recall was made, it would only remove Maduro, but the Chavista government remains in power. Tariq al-Sami will become the president. And I know that the opposition doesn't want that. And Chavez still seems to get a lot of support on the internet, and the Chavistas still exist. And I think that there's a lot of Chavistas that don't support Maduro, but they support Chavez. And I think Diosdado Caballos would be the closest they could maybe get to a Chavez figure with the options they have now. And Diosdado Caballos was his former vice president, one of the people very close to Chavez. Maduro was the last vice president that Chavez had. And Chavez had a few vice presidents because they switched like every couple of years or so. Aristobullo Usturias was only the vice president like a year. And then at the start of 2017, they went with a new vice president. And then it's very likely that potentially the last year, they might even have a different one. Or that they'll probably keep Tariq al-Sami for the rest of the presidency. So I wouldn't say it's very likely because the election happens next year. They'll probably keep him for the rest of the term. But there's very likely that there'll be a different vice president that'll run along whoever runs on the PSUV ticket in 2018. We can see the potential of a Henrique Capriles opposition to whoever the PSUV runs next year. And Henrique Capriles has already failed. He failed in 2012. He failed in 2013. But I have a feeling they're going to run him again. And I know they won't run like Ramos Ayub because he's I don't think I pronounced his name right, but he's I don't think they'll run a Ramos Ayub because he's ancient. He's from one of the people from the old Venezuelan government, Carlos Andres Perez or whatnot, and he's kind of just like a leftover from that. Carlos Andres Perez himself, by the way, died in 2010. So, if he was still around, the Venezuelan opposition would probably find a way to bring him back or something. But he's no longer in the picture. It's really more of the same shit from before, from the 90s. What this opposition wants to bring back into power now as we get into the later part of the 2010s. And that archaic government that led to slums and led to abstract poverty and many other ills of society that were in the country in the 1990s. Illiteracy. You had, on top of that, you also had people not getting good medical care. One of the Bolivian missions by Chavez was a mission for medical care. Another one was the universities, and now they have where and this is also, to the younger listeners, any if you're from any country, you can go and study in Venezuela at the Bolivian University of Venezuela for free. So that's something to keep in mind. Now the class will be in Spanish, so you have to speak Spanish in order to do so. But I think it's also for Latin. It was also for Latin America. For people like Mexico, go down there to Venezuela and study for free. And yeah, I don't know what the quality of education is, but it's at least an option for people to get a higher education that they would be able to get before. And there's also regular universities in Venezuela as well, but Venezuela has that option. And also to defend the legacy of Chavez are the colectivos, who are they're a militia that are to defend the Bolivian constitution, and they pretty much are there. I guess you could say if a coup was to happen, they're going to be part of the resistance. And some people, the media has falsely claimed them as thugs that defend the Chavez regime, but they're not in the business of harassing regular people or whatnot. The only people that would ever, I would say, come in their crosshairs without having provoked any direct violence on them first would be, like coup organizers or something like that. But then again, if they had organized a coup, then they would have organized violence against them and against the Venezuelan people. The Venezuelan opposition, I don't know if they'll ever be stupid enough to try that again. Venezuela has been a very interesting place the last few years, and there's been a lot of smack talk against them. But I will defend them on this radio show proudly. I'll defend Chavez, I'll defend Maduro, the Chavistas, and people say what they want about me. I have people down there in Venezuela that can confirm what I'm saying. I have quite a bit of Facebook friends in Venezuela, and one of the, I guess you could say, the partners to Voice of Rebellion, RNA News, with Freddie Nunez. I'll give him a shout out here. Lives in Venezuela, and he tells me about the situation every now and then. They also, there's even the war against Venezuela goes to like the cyber war with like Dollar Today, where people can trade their Venezuelan bolivars for dollars, and they give all these wacky exchange rates, which pretty much devalues the currency. It's economic war, and economic war can be more damaging at times than actual war. It's like I said, that the media can be more damaging at times than actual war, so can economic war. And economic war leads a lot of times to actual war. Sanctions are acts of war. And another thing is what they do is that they target your currency, like what they did to Zimbabwe, where they destroyed the Zimbabwean currency, and they were successful in that. They weren't successful in taking out Mugabe nor stopping Mugabe from doing certain moves. But Mugabe was forced to end up using Chinese currency rather than his own currency. So Mugabe, in that way, lost that battle, the economic war between Zimbabwe and the West. But IMF, World Bank, whatever, they tried to take out Mugabe, and he's still there. Mugabe's now been in power for like 37 years. So I guess you could say he's had the last laugh on that. Now he's 92 years old, 93 years old. I think he turned 93 last month, and he's kind of like one of the last examples, I guess you could say, of he's a leftover, I guess you could say, of some of the leaders that stood up to the United States for, back from that era. Now it seems like since the 90s and the 2000s, we've had people like Putin and Chavez come about, but he goes all the way back to 1980. And, at first he was like on the good side of Britain, and then he ended up, taking a stand against Britain, and they like took away his honors or whatever. But Mugabe, couldn't give a shit about what Britain thinks about him. And Mugabe's kind of like in many ways you could say is like he's like Chavez over in South America, but Mugabe actually was there from the independence of this country on. Chavez, he took his de facto independence for Venezuela, because before they were just practically a neo-colonial territory. Carlos Sanchez Perez was 100% on remote control from the United States, just like a lot of the other dictators that ruled in the 80s and 90s with Operation Condor. Now, instead of looking up, on Google tonight, I don't know what people, would be a trendy thing. Instead of looking up who won the Oscars a couple weeks ago or whatever, look up what the hell Operation Condor is. Which Operation Condor, ended up in the results of over 1 million South Americans dead. America supporting fascist dictators across South America in order to to keep control in the area, and they helped them remove over 1 million dissidents. People like Pinochet, Stroessner, Carlos Sanchez Perez. Venezuela was a major victim of Operation Condor, and Venezuela has now been really kind of like the leader in South America against the empire. And people should realize that people like Chavez don't hate Americans. And when they scream about the Yankees, they talk about the United States government. They talk about the people that back the United States government. Really just I guess really more like the people like to work in the embassy and stuff like that. People that back the United States government, but you realize there's some good people inside the United States that are fighters against imperialism, fighters against New World Order plans or whatnot, and he didn't generalize Americans completely. Morales, all of them, I think they have the same stance on Americans, and they try to make it seem like these leaders are anti-American in general, as they hate Americans, but they do not hate Americans. They hate our government, they hate our economic system, and they hate our foreign policy. And unfortunately, I think that those things cause in their countries potentially hate towards Americans, as we get lumped with all that stuff. We get lumped with our disastrous economic policies, our disastrous foreign policies. Anyways, we're in the last minute of the show, and next week, I haven't decided what will be the topic on next week's show, but definitely tune in. I'll be here next week. Thanks everyone for tuning in tonight to Voice of Rebellion Radio at UCY TV, and I know one thing though, is that I hope that at some point down the road I'll be able to take a trip down to Venezuela, see it with my own eyes, and get to see the country that Chavez left behind, and some of the history behind that country, because I've been right by it, but never been actually been able to go into Venezuela, and I've wanted to go before. But thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you next week as well, and also subscribe to Chris Jackson Rojas on Facebook.
Point of no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, that commented, kill the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. perfectly. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds him. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down now, then